Sheila pushed through the heavy glass doors of the university library, the hinges groaning faintly, as if they too were exhausted from holding back a day's worth of students. The evening air greeted her with a cool brush against her cheeks, and she blinked at the sight of the fading sun. The sky was a canvas smeared in deep oranges and purples, the kind of painting no artist could quite capture, yet it had a strange loneliness to it. Twilight always carried that feeling for her, too bright to be night, too dark to be day, suspended somewhere in between. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, heavy with the weight of textbooks, lecture notes, and her laptop. It wasn't just fabric and zippers. It was her semester, her lifeline, her anchor to dreams of getting through her political science major without collapsing from stress. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder, tightening it as if the motion itself could make the burden easier to carry. The sidewalks outside campus buzzed with the rhythm of students spilling out from late classes and workers heading home. Cars crawled along the main road, headlights already flickering to life in anticipation of the night. Sheila threaded her way through the stream of bodies, her steps purposeful but a little weary. She had spent 5 hours inside the library, most of them hunched over constitutional law case studies, and her eyes still carried that sting from staring too long at glowing screens and cramped handwriting. She glanced down at her watch. 6:42 p.m. If she walked quickly, she'd make it home before the storm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke open. The smell of rain was already there, sharp and metallic in the air, as though the sky had been holding its breath all day. As she walked, her mind refused to stay quiet. It replayed the day's chaos, her professor's sharp reminders about the upcoming exam, her group project partners who had vanished like ghosts, the cafeteria coffee that tasted like bitter water. But underneath all of it, a steadier current tugged, her determination not to fail, not to give her parents back home any reason to worry. They had stretched themselves thin to send her to this university. Every dollar mattered. Every grade carried weight. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out. A text from her roommate, Carly. "Hey, don't forget to grab eggs if you pass the corner store." "We're out. Again." Sheila sighed, half smiling. Carly was scatterbrained but sweet, and Sheila didn't mind doing small errands. She typed a quick reply. "Sure, if it's not raining yet." Tucking the phone away, she noticed how the crowd had thinned. The further she walked from campus, the fewer people remained, until the street carried only scattered figures. A man pushing a stroller, a woman talking into her Bluetooth earpiece, 2 teenagers arguing over a skateboard. Each disappeared into doorways or side streets, swallowed by the grid of the city. Sheila shifted her backpack again, tugging the strap so it sat snugly against her. The pressure left a faint ache in her shoulder, but she preferred it that way. She had grown up in a neighborhood where her mother's constant refrain was, "Keep your bag close, your head high, and your eyes sharp." Old advice, but still useful. She slowed as she reached the intersection where 2 routes forked toward her apartment. The longer one curved along the main avenue, bright with shopfronts and people bustling in and out. It was safer, more open. The shorter path, a narrow side alley between a convenience store and a laundromat, would cut 10 minutes off her walk. She hesitated, biting her lip. The clouds above were swelling darker now, thunder muttering faintly in the distance. 10 minutes might mean the difference between beating the rain and being drenched. She told herself she wasn't nervous. After all, she had walked that shortcut before, once or twice when she was in a hurry. It wasn't as though danger lurked on every corner. Still, her steps slowed, her thoughts prickling with an unease she couldn't quite name. She told herself she was tired, that her nerves were raw from too many hours of study, that the shadows in her mind were louder than the shadows in the world around her. Sheila exhaled, squared her shoulders, and turned into the alley. Immediately, the sounds of the city softened. The chatter of pedestrians, the hum of car engines, even the steady thrum of music spilling from a kaffa, all of it dimmed into a muffled hush. The alley smelled faintly of damp concrete, motor oil, and something metallic, like rust. Overhead, a single streetlight buzzed and flickered, throwing long, uncertain shadows onto the ground. Her shoes tapped against uneven pavement as she moved deeper in, her steps sounding louder than usual, too loud. She tried not to notice the graffiti scrawled across the brick walls, angry, jagged letters layered over years of faded tags. Somewhere behind a locked gate, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Sheila tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack, adjusting her pace. She reminded herself she was almost halfway through, that the other side of the alley would spill her back onto a busier street. Just a few minutes, and she'd be fine. But as she walked, the prickling unease returned, crawling like static across her skin. The air felt heavier here, thicker, as though the narrow walls themselves pressed in around her. She told herself she was being paranoid, but her heart beat faster anyway. She didn't see the three figures yet, not clearly. Not enough to know. But they were there behind her, just far enough to stay unnoticed. They moved deliberately, their footsteps softened against the pavement, their voices hushed to whispers. One nudged the other, their eyes fixed on the straps of her backpack, on the way she carried it like something precious. Sheila kept walking, unaware of the storm, both in the sky and behind her, slowly closing in. The alley swallowed her almost instantly. The brightness of the main road shrank behind her, like a window closing, until only the dim, flickering light above guided her steps. The hum of traffic became a muffled echo, replaced by the low buzz of an overhead power line and the faint drip of water from a rusted pipe. Sheila tugged her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, though the air wasn't cold so much as unsettled. The walls of the alley rose on either side, tall and narrow, blotting out much of the twilight sky. Graffiti stretched across the bricks in crooked layers. Names, curses, and drawings she didn't understand. Some had been there long enough to fade into pale stains, while newer tags screened with neon paint. She felt their silent voices pressing at her, as if the walls were speaking in a language she couldn't translate. She quickened her steps. Her sneakers slapped against uneven pavement, the sound echoing sharper than it should have. A stray cat darted from one trash bin to another, startling her into a tiny gasp. She laughed nervously at herself, shaking her head. Get a grip, Sheila. It's just an alley. 2 minutes and you're out. But the quiet was deceptive. Somewhere behind her, footsteps fell into rhythm with her own. At first, she didn't notice. The sound was faint, blending with the natural echoes of her movement. It was only when she slowed briefly to adjust her backpack strap that she caught it, the soft, delayed scrape of another shoe against pavement. She glanced over her shoulder quickly, heart ticking up a notch. A man stood near the alley entrance, pretending to look at his phone. He wore a hood pulled over his head, face shadowed, posture too still. She turned forward again, biting her lip. Maybe he wasn't following her. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Still, her chest tightened. She lengthened her stride, footsteps faster now, determined not to look back again. The quicker she reached the other side, the better. A breeze funneled through the narrow passage, carrying the scent of damp cardboard and stale beer. Sheila's senses sharpened with every step. The trickle of water, the hum of a neon sign overhead, the rattling lid of a trash bin, it all sounded louder than usual, like a warning whispered into her ears. When she reached the halfway point, her pulse was already climbing. She stole another glance back. The man in the hood was closer now, and he wasn't alone. 2 others had joined him, walking side by side, talking in low voices she couldn't catch. They weren't rushing, but they weren't dawdling either. Their eyes, though distant, seemed fixed in her direction. Her throat tightened. She considered pulling out her phone, but what would she do? Call Carly? Text her parents? She imagined her mother's voice on the other end, worried and powerless, and shoved the thought away. She could handle a 2-minute walk through an alley. People walked here every day. Yet she shifted her backpack to both shoulders, cinching the straps tight. The weight pressed more firmly against her spine. If someone tried to pull it off now, at least it wouldn't slip easily. The gesture gave her a sliver of control, though her palms had grown damp against the fabric. The alley narrowed further, the walls leaning in until the space felt barely wide enough for a car to squeeze through. A row of dumpsters lined the right side, overflowing with black trash bags. The smell of rot clung heavy to the air, making her nose wrinkle. Broken glass glittered faintly near a gutter, catching what little light remained. Her footsteps quickened again, almost matching the beat of her racing heart. The 3 men's steps followed, closer now. She could hear them distinctly, boots scraping, soles thudding against asphalt. Her mind scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe they were just walking the same route. Maybe they lived nearby. Maybe she was inventing danger because her nerves were frayed. But deep down, instinct told another story. Instinct screamed that the timing wasn't coincidence, that their pace matched hers too neatly, that 3 men don't just happen to drift into an alley behind a lone woman at twilight. Sheila's breaths shortened. She reached for calm, whispering silently, almost out. Just keep moving. Don't run. Don't show fear. The light at the far end of the alley glowed faintly now, a golden square of safety leading back to the main road. Each step brought it closer, though not quickly enough. She wanted to sprint, to bolt for it, but something inside told her not to. Running might provoke them, or worse, confirm to herself that she was prey. Behind her, one of the men laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, a short burst of sound that bounced against the brick walls like a slap. Sheila's blood ran cold. She didn't turn around this time. She didn't want to see how close they were. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the straps again, holding them so tightly her knuckles ached. The backpack dug into her shoulders, a burden heavier now than it had ever been. It carried not just books and a laptop, but the fragile boundary between safety and vulnerability. If they wanted it, would they stop at that? Or was the bag just an excuse? Her thoughts spiraled, clashing with the steady rhythm of her feet. She imagined headlines, imagined her parents' faces, imagined the officer reports she'd read in the campus safety newsletter. Stories of muggings, stolen phones, bags ripped away in seconds. She had always thought those were just statistics, distant and detached. Now they breathed down her neck. The glow of the street beyond grew larger, yet every second stretched unbearably long. The wall seemed to lean closer, funneling her toward a moment she couldn't yet see but could already feel. The footsteps behind her slowed. For one breath, she thought maybe they had turned away. Relief flared like a spark, only to be crushed by the scrape of rubber against pavement, quickening again, sharper, deliberate. Sheila's heart slammed into her ribs. She bit her lip hard enough to taste iron. The end of the alley was only a dozen yards away. Just a few more steps, and she would be back on a busy street with people and lights and noise. A place where safety lived. But safety still felt impossibly far, and danger was breathing closer with every echoing footstep. Sheila didn't know it yet, but the storm behind her was about to break. The light at the end of the alley was almost close enough to touch. Sheila's pulse raced as she kept her eyes locked on it, forcing herself not to turn around again. If she could just push forward, if she could just take a few more steps, she'd be safe. She told herself this like a mantra, each word a beat to match her footsteps. Just a little farther. Just a little farther. But safety doesn't always wait for you to arrive. Sometimes danger catches up first. It happened in a blur. A rush of air. A scrape of shoes accelerating behind her. Then, a violent tug. Her backpack was yanked backward, so hard it wrenched her entire body around. The strap bit into her shoulder, burning her skin as it slipped. The sudden force knocked the breath out of her, sending her stumbling sideways into the brick wall. Her palms hit rough stone, scraping open. A sharp gasp tore from her throat. For a heartbeat, Sheila didn't understand what was happening. Her mind refused to register the violence, lagging behind her body's instincts. Then she saw him, one of the men, tall and broad, gripping her backpack strap with both hands, like it was a prize he'd been waiting for all night. No. The word ripped from her chest before she knew she was speaking. She lunged back, her fingers clawing for the strap. But the man jerked it again, dragging her a step closer to him. His hood slipped back slightly, revealing a stubble-lined jaw and eyes narrowed with cold focus. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The grip on the bag told her everything he wasn't letting go. Another man moved in from her left, his laugh cutting through the tension like a blade. "Got something good in there, sweetheart?" His voice was mocking, oily, the kind that made her stomach twist. Her books shifted inside the bag, the weight unbalancing her as the first man yanked harder. Sheila stumbled again, knees buckling. Panic surged up her throat, bitter and metallic. She wasn't just fighting for her belongings, she was fighting against the terrifying truth that three strangers now controlled the moment. "Let go," she cried, her voice cracking. She pulled with everything she had, her fingers slipping on the fabric as the strap dug into her hands. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but she didn't release it. Her body trembled with adrenaline. The third man circled behind her. She couldn't see him, but she felt him, a shadow moving just out of sight. Her chest tightened with dread. 3 against 1. She couldn't win. The strap slid farther down her shoulder, ripping free at last. The sudden loss of resistance sent her sprawling forward, nearly falling to her knees. The tall man staggered back with the momentum, clutching her backpack triumphantly. Sheila's heart dropped. Her laptop, her notes, her life, it was in his hands now. "No," she screamed again, the sound raw. Without thinking, she launched herself forward, reaching for the bag. Her fingers brushed against the zipper, desperate, but the second man shoved her hard in the shoulder. She crashed back into the wall, pain shooting through her spine. The bricks scraped her arm, leaving streaks of grit and blood. The first man unzipped the backpack roughly, rifling through it with greedy hands. A textbook fell out, smacking the ground with a dull thud. Pages bent, fluttering against the dirty pavement. The men laughed. Sheila's chest heaved. Every breath was shallow, sharp. Fear clawed inside her, but fury burned through it too. They weren't just taking her belongings. They were tearing apart everything she had worked for, everything her parents had sacrificed for. She couldn't let it happen. She darted forward again, shoving the second man with all her weight. It startled him enough that he stumbled back a step. Her hands latched onto the backpack, yanking it toward her. The tall man snarled. His knuckles turned white as he jerked it back. "Stupid girl." The words slashed through the air. His spit flew as he growled, his face twisted with anger. He yanked so hard the strap whipped against her cheek, stinging like a lash. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain alone, but from rage, from humiliation. Her body shook violently as adrenaline flooded every vein. She screamed again, louder this time, a piercing, desperate cry that echoed off the alley walls. "Help! Somebody, help me!" Her voice carried into the night, bouncing into the streets beyond, maybe reaching ears she couldn't see. The men cursed under their breath, their laughter fading into urgency. The second one glanced nervously toward the alley's mouth. "Shut her up," he hissed. The third man finally moved from behind her, stepping closer, his shadow looming. He grabbed her wrist roughly, trying to pry her away. His grip was iron, crushing, sending pain shooting up her arm. Sheila kicked wildly, her sneaker striking his shin. He yelped, startled, and released her. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She bent quickly, grabbing at one of her fallen textbooks with shaking hands, and hurled it at the first man's chest. It thudded uselessly against him, but it startled him enough that he loosened his grip. Sheila lunged again, both hands clawing at her backpack. For a second, it felt like a tug-of-war frozen in time, the three of them on one side, her alone on the other, the bag stretched taut between. Her knuckles bled where the fabric tore at her skin, but she refused to let go. "Crazy girl," the second man muttered, kicking her shin hard. Pain exploded up her leg, buckling her knee. She collapsed against the wall, gasping, but her hands still clung desperately to the strap. The tall man cursed loudly. "Forget it, just grab what's inside and let's go." Sheila's chest constricted. Her laptop. Her essays. Weeks of notes. If they ran with those, everything would be gone. Her life would unravel in the span of seconds. "No." She cried again, her voice hoarse, breaking. Tears streaked her cheeks now, though she barely felt them. She was fighting not just against them, but against despair, against the weight of helplessness pressing in from all sides. The men's movements grew harsher, more frantic. A backpack tore against its seams. Another textbook tumbled free, pages scattering across the filthy ground like white flags of surrender. Papers flew into puddles, ink bleeding into illegible smears. Her arms trembled. Her strength faltered. She couldn't hold on forever. Fear whispered in her ear that she was seconds from losing everything, maybe more than just the bag. The second man leaned close, his breath sour against her face. "Let go, girl, or we'll make you." The threat sank into her bones like ice. Her vision blurred, not from tears alone, but from the dizzying swirl of terror and exhaustion. The world around her spun into chaos echoes of laughter, curses, the crash of falling books, the sting of brick against her skin. Time fractured. Every heartbeat felt stretched, endless. Sheila screamed again, her voice cracking but desperate, forcing it to carry as far as it could. "Help!" For a split second, the alley went still. Even the thieves froze, startled by the sheer force of her cry. And somewhere, just beyond the mouth of the alley, a new sound answered, the steady, deliberate rhythm of boots on pavement. The cry ripped from Sheila's throat, echoed against the walls like glass shattering. "Help, somebody, please?" Her voice sounded alien to her own ears, raw, sharp, almost animal. For a heartbeat, the alley itself seemed to pause, as if stunned by the sound. Then chaos rushed back in. "Shut her up." The second man snarled, lunging forward. He grabbed at her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Sheila twisted violently, slamming her elbow into his ribs with everything she had. He grunted, more surprised than hurt, and loosened his grip. Her books scattered around her feet, pages bent, edges blackened with grime. She bent quickly, fumbling to gather them, clutching one against her chest like a shield. The men laughed harshly, their voices overlapping, but she barely heard them. Her pulse roared in her ears. The tall man still clutched her backpack, tugging hard. "Just drop it, girl." It's not worth it, but it was. It wasn't just canvas and zippers. It was her laptop with half-finished essays, weeks of lecture notes written in the margins, the textbook she couldn't afford to replace. It was the hour she'd sacrificed, the weight of her parents' trust, the very thread tying her to her future. Sheila gritted her teeth and pulled back. "No," the second man cursed. "You're making this harder than it has to be." He shoved her shoulder, slamming her into the wall again. The impact rattled her bones, scraping her skin raw. Her vision flickered for a moment, stars bursting at the edges. Still, she didn't let go. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Every muscle in her arms ached as she pulled, but her determination burned hotter than the pain. The bag slipped, then tightened again, a violent tug of war. She felt the seams straining, the fabric whining under the pressure. The third man moved closer now, stepping into her space. His shadow loomed over her, his face partly hidden under a baseball cap. He leaned down, sneering. "You scream again, and you'll regret it." Her throat tightened. Terror clawed at her chest, threatening to choke her. But even as fear surged, a stubborn fire sparked within. She thought of her mother's voice, the one that had carried her through childhood. "Don't let anyone take what's yours without a fight." So she screamed again, louder this time. "Help!" The sound tore her throat raw, but she didn't care. The tall man swore and yanked harder. The force ripped her forward, so violently her knees slammed against the pavement. Pain shot up her legs, white-hot, but she clung tighter. The strap sliced into her palms, skin splitting. Blood slicked her grip, but still she refused to let go. "You crazy," the man spat, shaking the bag. Papers burst out of the half-sipped pouch, fluttering upward like startled birds. Her carefully written notes, hours of work, drifted down into puddles, ink bleeding, words dissolving. "No." Sheila's chest heaved as she tried to snatch them mid-her, one hand gripping the strap, the other clawing for loose pages. Her desperation bordered on wildness, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. The men cursed again, their tone shifting from amusement to irritation. What was supposed to be quick and easy was spiraling into a noisy, messy struggle. The second man kicked her shin. Pain exploded, sharp and searing, forcing a cry from her lips. Her leg buckled, but she twisted sideways, crashing her shoulder into him. He stumbled, nearly tripping over the scattered books. Her breaths were shallow now, panic surging in waves. She knew she couldn't overpower them, but maybe, just maybe, she could outlast them. If she kept resisting, if she kept screaming, someone might hear. Someone might come. But doubt gnawed at her. What if no one did? What if this alley was too quiet, too forgotten? What if her screams dissolved into nothing, carried away by the storm brewing above? Her mind flickered with flashes. Her parents' proud faces when she got her acceptance letter, Carly teasing her for always overpacking her bag, the quiet satisfaction of handing in a paper on time. Were those moments about to be ripped away along with her belongings? Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. She blinked hard, planting her feet firmly against the ground, ignoring the throbbing ache in her shin. The tall man growled, losing patience. "Forget it. Just take it and run." "No." Sheila shrieked, throwing her whole body backward, jerking the bag toward herself. The motion was so sudden, it caught him off guard. He stumbled a step forward, colliding into the second man. For an instant, the grip loosened. Sheila seized the chance. She tore the bag toward her chest, hugging it tightly, curling her body around it like armor. She crouched low, pressing herself against the wall, every muscle taut with desperation. "Grab it!" The third man barked, lunging. He snatched at the strap, ripping it from her fingers. The sudden pull tore her skin, leaving her palms raw and stinging. "No, please." Her voice cracked, breaking into a sob as she clung again. Her body ached, but she didn't stop. The second man knelt, yanking at her arms. His fingers dug in cruelly, bruising her skin. She kicked out, hitting his thigh. He hissed in pain, shoving her backward. Her head smacked the wall, a dull thud that made her vision swim. For a moment, the world spun. Lights flickered at the edge of her sight. Her grip loosened. The tall man ripped the bag free at last. He staggered backward, clutching it triumphantly. His chest heaved, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Got it," Sheila gasped, her hands trembling as they closed on nothing but air. The emptiness hit harder than the pain. Her backpack, a symbol of everything she carried, everything she worked for, was gone. But even then, she wasn't finished. A raw cry tore from her throat, primal and defiant. She lunged forward one last time, her fingers catching the edge of the strap. She pulled, her entire body trembling with the effort. The three men shouted over each other, voices frantic now. The second one barked, "Leave her. We don't have time. Take it." The third snapped. The tall man's grip faltered as Sheila clawed again. The struggle had stretched on far too long. Sirens were still distant, but every second felt dangerous now for them. Sheila's heart thundered. She wasn't thinking anymore. She wasn't calculating odds or weighing risks. She was pure instinct, pure resistance. Fear coursed through her veins, but it was tangled with something fiercer, the refusal to surrender. Her voice cracked the air one final time, louder than ever. "Help!" The sound carried beyond the alley, slicing into the night. And this time, it didn't vanish into silence. It landed in ears that mattered. Because footsteps measured, steady, and deliberate were approaching fast. Sheila's final scream still reverberated against the brick walls, raw and jagged, when the sound of new footsteps sliced through the chaos. They were heavier, slower, but steady and unhurried rhythm that didn't match the frantic shuffle of the three men. The robbers froze for half a second. Their heads whipped toward the alley's mouth, eyes narrowing. And there he was. A figure emerged from the dim light at the far end, walking with deliberate calm. His uniform was unmistakable, even in the tick. Fading glow, the dark navy fabric, the badge gleaming faintly on his chest, the belt heavy with tools of authority. His presence filled the narrow passage, like a shadow stretching long and unyielding. Officer Miguel Ramirez. He had been patrolling only a block away, investigating a noise complaint near the laundromat. He hadn't expected to stumble into something like this, a young woman, battered and breathless, clutching desperately at her bag while three men towered over her. But years on the force had sharpened his instincts, and in one glance, he knew exactly what was unfolding. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. His training and his nature told him that chaos fed on chaos. What the moment needed was not more noise, but control. Sheila's tear-streaked face snapped toward him. For an instant, she didn't trust her eyes. Her vision had been blurred with pain and fear, and she thought maybe she was imagining him. But the gleam of the badge, the quiet authority in his stride, was real. Relief surged so powerfully through her chest, she nearly sobbed. Her grip loosened on the backpack, not from surrender, but because she finally believed she wasn't fighting alone anymore. The tall man swore under his breath. "Cops!" The second man's bravado faltered, his eyes darting toward the alley's exit, calculating distance. But Ramirez blocked the only way out, his body positioned squarely in the center. The third man hissed, "Let's go." "Leave it." But Ramirez kept coming, unhurried, his gaze sharp but unreadable. His boots struck the ground with a rhythm that commanded attention. Each step carried weight, not just physical, but psychological, pressing into the atmosphere. Sheila tried to push herself upright, her body trembling. She wanted to call out, to beg for help, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she clung to the sound of his footsteps, like a lifeline pulling her back from the edge of despair. The robbers weren't laughing now. Their voices had dropped into urgent whispers. "What do we do?" the second muttered. "Shut up," the tall one snapped, though his tone was less certain than before. He still gripped Sheila's backpack, knuckles tight, but his eyes flickered nervously toward the officer. Ramirez stopped a few paces away, just beyond reach, his posture straight and unyielding. His right hand rested near his holster, not drawing, not threatening, but reminding everyone in the alley of the line that had been crossed. His voice cut through the thick tension, calm and level. "Evening, gentlemen." The simplicity of the words was disarming. No yelling, no barking commands. Just a quiet greeting, delivered with a certainty that said, "I'm in charge here now." The men shifted uneasily. The second one forced a sneer. "Mind your business, officer." Just a little misunderstanding. Ramirez's eyes flicked briefly to Sheila. She was slumped against the wall, her hands scraped raw, blood streaking her arms, her chest rising and falling in panicked bursts. Her eyes met his, pleading, desperate. The truth was written all over her body. He returned his gaze to the men, his voice steady as stone. "That doesn't look like a misunderstanding to me." The tall man tightened his grip on the backpack, though sweat glistened on his temple. "She was just giving us trouble." Ramirez took another step forward, slow, deliberate. His hand hovered near his radio now, ready to call for backup if needed. "Drop the bag." The alley was silent except for Sheila's ragged breathing. The second man shifted on his feet. "We're not looking for trouble." "You already found it," Ramirez interrupted, his tone still calm, but edged with steel. His eyes never wavered, locking each of them in place. "I won't say it again." "Drop the bag." Sheila's heart hammered. She watched the exchange as if in a dream, her body trembling, her palms throbbing from torn skin. The officer's voice was unlike anything she had heard in the chaos. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't violent. It was calm, controlled, but filled with a power that commanded obedience. For the first time, she believed she might make it out of the alley alive. The men hesitated, their confidence unraveling under the weight of Ramirez's presence. They had expected an easy target, a quick grab and go. They hadn't expected him. The tall man's jaw clenched. He looked from Sheila, crumpled and defiant even in her pain, back to Ramirez, unshakable and steady. His fingers twitched on the strap. And then, for the first time that night, doubt flickered in his eyes. Ramirez took one final step, closing the distance just enough to make his authority undeniable. His voice, calm but unyielding, carried through the alley. "Stand down." The words weren't shouted, but they struck harder than any yell. They landed heavy, undeniable, a command carved into the air. The men froze. The second one's mouth opened, then shut. The third shuffled back a step, uncertainty in his eyes. The tall man's grip loosened, just slightly, his knuckles no longer white. Sheila's breath caught. She felt the shift, the change in power, the balance tilting away from fear and back toward safety. The calm voice of one man had cut through the chaos that had nearly consumed her. The alley fell into a tense, brittle silence. And for the first time all night, Sheila wasn't the only one resisting. The words landed in the alley like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward with invisible force. "Stand down." The three men froze. It wasn't just the authority in the officer's tone. It was the certainty. Ramirez hadn't shouted, hadn't raised a weapon, hadn't taken a single step that seemed rushed or fearful. He spoke as if the outcome was already decided, as if resistance was nothing more than a delay to the inevitable. For a long, fragile moment, no one moved. The only sound was Sheila's ragged breathing and the faint drip of water from a gutter above. Even the city's noise, the hum of traffic, the distant blare of horns, seemed to fade under the weight of that command. The tall man's grip on the backpack tightened instinctively. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts, the adrenaline still pumping hard. His eyes darted from Ramirez to the alley's mouth, calculating. Could they bolt? Could they push past him? But Ramirez stood centered, unflinching, his stance wide, calm, immovable. The second man muttered under his breath. "We can take him." But the words were shaky, unconvincing even to his own ears. His hands fidgeted at his sides, restless, betraying the first cracks in his confidence. The third man shook his head sharply. "No way." "He's got backup." He glanced over his shoulder, paranoia creeping in. The alley stretched into shadow, and though no other officers were visible, the idea that more might be near gnawed at him. Ramirez let the silence stretch, refusing to fill it with threats. He knew the power of patience. His calm composure forced them to confront their own choices without distraction. Sheila clutched her scraped hands against her chest, her entire body trembling. The command still echoed in her mind. She had felt helpless, cornered, overwhelmed until that moment. Now, something inside her shifted. She didn't know how this officer could sound so steady in the face of danger, but his voice reached through her panic and anchored her. The tall man licked his lips. His knuckles were pale against the strap of the bag, but for the first time, his hold looked fragile. He wasn't sure if he was gripping the backpack, or if the backpack was gripping him, tethering him to a crime he suddenly wished he hadn't committed. Ramirez's eyes never left his. Calm, focused, unwavering. "You don't want to do this," he said evenly. "Drop the bag and nobody gets hurt." The second man scoffed, but his voice cracked. "Yeah, right. You'll just haul us in anyway." Ramirez's expression didn't change. "You're already in deeper than you should be. Don't make it worse." The alley felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. Sheila could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, in the raw scrapes on her palms. She wanted to scream at them, to claw her bag back, to collapse in relief, but her body stayed frozen, waiting. The tall man's breath came out shaky. His chest rose and fell in jerks. He looked down at Sheila, then back at Ramirez. "She fought," he muttered, almost defensively, as if it explained everything. "She had every right to," Ramirez replied calmly. "Now put it down." The officer's voice was a strange mix, so gentle it was almost soothing, yet so firm it brooked no argument. It was the voice of a man who had de-escalated fights in bars, calmed angry parents at midnight calls, talked down desperate suspects teetering on the edge of no return. The second man shifted, muttering again. "This is stupid. Let's just go." But Ramirez's presence filled the space. Leaving wasn't simple. Not with him blocking the only exit. Not with his quiet assurance that they weren't going anywhere without facing the consequences. The tall man's shoulders slumped slightly. His grip loosened, fingers twitching. The weight of the backpack seemed heavier in his hands. Now, not just fabric and books, but evidence, guilt, and the unbearable pressure of a choice that couldn't be undone. "Stand down," Ramirez repeated, slower this time, each word distinct, carrying the gravity of an unshakable order. The second man swore under his breath, taking a step back. The third put his hands up, palms outward, as if signaling surrender. The tall man hesitated a beat longer then, with a frustrated grunt, he let the strap slip through his fingers. The backpack fell to the ground with a dull thud. The sound cracked the tension like a branch breaking underfoot. Sheila's chest heaved as relief surged so suddenly it made her dizzy. Her bag, her lifeline, her work, her future was safe again. Ramirez's eyes stayed locked on the men, his posture still guarded, but inside he felt the shift too. The critical moment had passed. The danger hadn't fully dissolved. Desperation could spark rash actions, but the first barrier had been crossed. Step back, Ramirez said firmly. The men obeyed, inching backward, their eyes darting nervously. Their earlier bravado had drained away, leaving only uncertainty and a dawning awareness of consequences. Sheila sighed against the wall, her legs trembling. She wanted to crawl forward and snatch her bag, to hold it tight against her chest, but she didn't move yet. She didn't want to break the fragile control Ramirez had secured over the scene. The officer's calm voice wrapped around her like a shield. For the first time all night, she felt protected. The tall man muttered again, bitter, but his eyes no longer held the same fire. The second man cursed softly, but his hands stayed empty. The third kept his palms raised, as if eager to prove he wanted no part of this anymore. Ramirez finally reached for his radio, his tone steady as he called for backup. But even as he spoke into the receiver, his gaze never wavered from the men before him. He didn't need to raise his weapon. His calm authority was weapon enough. Sheila closed her eyes briefly, a sob catching in her throat. She had fought with everything she had, screamed until her voice cracked, resisted until her body nearly broke. But in the end, it was not force that saved her. It was the quiet, commanding voice of someone who refused to let chaos win. The echo of those two words, "Stand down," would live in her memory forever. The backpack's dull thud on the ground seemed to echo louder than any gunshot might have. In that sound, something broke, not just the robber's grip, but the suffocating stranglehold of fear that had bound the alley. Still, the tension didn't vanish. It hovered like a storm cloud, just waiting for the wrong move to crack it open again. Ramirez's voice came steady, unwavering. "Step back. Hands where I can see them." The three men shifted reluctantly, caught between obedience and defiance. The tall one muttered curses under his breath, glaring at Sheila as though she had ruined everything by fighting back. The second kicked at the ground, restless, his bravado draining with each passing second. The third kept his hands raised, his shoulders slumped in resignation. The silence shattered as Ramirez lifted his radio. Unit 47 requesting immediate backup. Possible attempted robbery in progress. 3 suspects, 1 victim. Location: Maple and 7th Alleyway. His words were clipped but calm, delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed 1,000 emergencies. Static crackled, and a voice answered, "Copy that, Unit 47. Backup en route. Ada 2 minutes. 2 minutes." To Sheila, it felt like an eternity. Her body sagged against the brick wall, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had fueled her resistance drained away, leaving her trembling and weak. Pain pulsed in her scraped palms, her bruised shin, her throbbing shoulder where she had been slammed against the wall. But none of it mattered compared to the fragile relief blooming in her chest. Her bag lay on the ground a few feet away, just out of reach. She stared at it as though it were a lost friend returned, every instinct screaming to lunge forward and grab it. But her legs refused to move. She was still too afraid to disturb the fragile balance Ramirez had secured. Ramirez's presence was unshakable. He didn't pace, didn't shout, didn't betray any hint of panic. His calm was its own kind of weapon steadying Sheila, disarming the suspects, filling the alley with an authority no one dared challenge. "Don't be stupid," he said evenly, eyes sweeping over the men. "Backup's on the way. Do yourselves a favor, stay put." The tall man's jaw clenched. He spat on the ground, his eyes flashing with anger, but he didn't move forward. The second man shuffled his feet, but kept his hands visible. The third lowered his gaze to the pavement, silent. For Sheila, time bent strangely. Every second stretched into a minute, every small sound amplified, the drip of water from a gutter, the distant rumble of traffic, the uneven rhythm of her own breath. She wanted to cry, to collapse, to scream again, but instead she clung to the sight of Ramirez, standing tall, a wall between her and the chaos. Then came the faint but growing sound of sirens. The wail was distant at first, like a whisper threading through the city's noise. But it grew louder, nearer, filling the night with its unmistakable urgency. The suspects stiffened, their unease multiplying. "That's it," Ramirez said calmly. "Game's over." The second man swore again, but this time it sounded hollow. The tall man's chest rose and fell quickly, his earlier bravado crumbling with each approaching second. The third exhaled heavily, resignation etched into the slump of his shoulders. The red and blue glow reached the alley first, streaks of light dancing across the walls. Moments later, 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop at the entrance. Doors slammed. Boots pounded against pavement. "Police!" Voices rang out, commanding, sharp. In an instant, Ramirez's calm control expanded into collective authority. 2 more officers stormed into the alley, their hands ready, their eyes sweeping over the scene. The suspects had no fight left in them. Under the glare of flashlights and the bark of commands, they raised their hands higher, stepping back as cuffs clicked around their wrists. Sheila sagged fully against the wall, tears finally breaking free. The sight of the men restrained hands bound, heads lowered unraveled the last thread of fear, wound tight inside her chest. Ramirez stepped forward, retrieving the backpack from where it had fallen. He dusted it lightly with his hand before turning to Sheila. For the first time since arriving, his voice softened. "This yours?" She nodded, unable to form words. Her throat ached from screaming, and her emotions swirled too wildly to steady. He crouched slightly, placing the bag gently in her arms. She clutched it like a lifeline, hugging it against her chest. The rough canvas pressed against her scraped palms, sending sparks of pain through her skin, but she didn't care. It was hers. It was safe. "Are you hurt?" Ramirez asked, his tone careful, measured. Sheila shook her head quickly, then hesitated. "Just scrapes, bruises." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the weight of everything she had endured. One of the backup officers approached. "Ambulance on the way. We'll have her checked just in case." Sheila's instinct was to protest. She didn't want to make a fuss, but her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled slightly when she tried to straighten. Ramirez steadied her instantly, his hand firm on her arm, but not rough, grounding her with simple presence. "You did good," he said quietly, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "You held on. You called for help. That's why we're here now." The words broke something inside her. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, hot and uncontrollable. For so long in that alley she had felt alone, fighting against impossible odds. To hear that her resistance had mattered, it undid her. The suspects were led past her, cuffed and sullen. The tall man glared once more, but the fire had drained from his eyes. Under the flash of red and blue lights, he looked smaller, less dangerous, almost pathetic. Sheila refused to meet his gaze. She buried her face in her bag, clutching it tighter. The sirens quieted as the scene settled, but the adrenaline still pulsed in her veins. She was exhausted, her body aching in a dozen places, but her heart still raced as if it hadn't gotten the message that she was safe. Ramirez stayed close, his calm presence a steady anchor. He spoke to the other officers briefly, updating them on what he had witnessed. But every so often, his gaze flicked back to Sheila, as if ensuring she didn't drift too far into shock. The ambulance arrived minutes later, its bright lights slicing into the alley. A paramedic crouched beside Sheila, checking her scraped hands, her bruised shin, the bump forming on her temple. They spoke softly, gently, coaxing her into deep breaths. Through it all, Sheila's eyes sought Ramirez. He wasn't hovering, wasn't overbearing, but he was there, solid and certain. The same calm figure who had stepped into chaos, and simply spoke an order into existence. When the suspects were finally loaded into the patrol cars, the alley felt different. Not empty, but lighter, cleansed of the menace that had lingered there minutes earlier. For Sheila, the resolution wasn't just in the arrests or the return of her backpack. It was in the knowledge that someone had seen her fight, heard her cry, and chosen to answer with strength. The storm above finally broke, fat raindrops splattering against the pavement, washing away the scattered papers and footprints. Sheila tilted her face up briefly, letting the rain mix with her tears. For the first time that night, she wasn't afraid of the dark. The storm had broken fully now, rain falling in sheets that hissed as it struck the hot pavement. The alley, moments ago filled with shouts and struggle, was washed clean by the downpour. The flashing patrol lights reflected in puddles, turning the ground into a fractured canvas of red and blue. Sheila sat on the edge of the ambulance stretcher, her damp hair clinging to her face. The paramedics had cleaned the scrapes on her hands, wrapped them gently in gauze, and checked the bruise on her shin. She kept insisting she was fine, that others needed their help more, but they worked with quiet efficiency, unfazed by her protests. Her backpack rested beside her, damp from the rain but intact. She kept one hand pressed against it, as if afraid it might be snatched away again if she let go. Officer Ramirez stood a few feet away, speaking with the other officers. His voice carried the same calm authority it had in the alley, but now it was laced with professionalism details about suspects, charges, evidence. Yet every so often, his gaze flicked back to her, not in pity, but in quiet assurance, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. Sheila stared down at her bandaged palms, the ache sharp but strangely grounding. The fight replayed in her mind in flashes, the tall man's hand ripping at her strap, the brutal slam against the wall, a scatter of her notes dissolving in dirty puddles. For a moment, her breath caught, panic tightening her chest again. She forced herself to look up, to focus on the present, the flashing lights, the officers writing reports, the paramedic adjusting her bandage. It was over. She had survived. Ramirez approached at last, his posture steady even in the rain. He crouched slightly, so he was eye level with her. "How are you holding up?" Sheila managed a weak laugh, though her voice trembled. "Honestly? I feel like I got hit by a truck." His mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "That's normal. What you went through, it takes a toll. But you did good. You fought. You didn't give up." Her eyes stung. I thought they were going to take everything. Not just my bag. Me." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated how small it sounded. Ramirez's expression softened. "They didn't. Because you resisted. Because you called for help. And because you held on long enough for me to get there." The words sank into her, steady and real. For so long in the alley, she had felt powerless. But hearing it framed differently, that her resistance mattered, that her fight had bought her survival, shifted something deep inside her. She clutched the strap of her bag tighter. "It's just a backpack, I know, but it's more than that," Ramirez interrupted gently. "It's your work, your future, your independence. It's everything you've been carrying on your own." They weren't just trying to take a bag. They were trying to take control. You didn't let them. Sheila swallowed hard, her throat aching. She hadn't thought of it that way, but it was true. The bag was more than fabric and zippers. It was symbolic of the life she was fighting for. The paramedic interrupted softly. She should go to the hospital. Just for a full evaluation. Head injury, bruising. Sheila shook her head, panic rising at the thought of sterile rooms and fluorescent lights. But Ramirez's steady gaze caught hers. "It's just precaution. You'll be okay." And somehow, when he said it, she believed it. The ambulance ride was short, the sirens silent this time. Sheila sat inside, her backpack on her lap, her hands resting on it protectively. The paramedic asked her questions, her name, the date, whether she felt dizzy. She answered automatically, but her mind drifted back to the alley. Every detail was sharp. The scrape of her knees against concrete, the way the tall man's grip bruised her arms, the suffocating fear that she would disappear into the night unnoticed. But overlaying those memories was another, the calm, steady voice that had cut through everything. Stand down. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests, shining lights into her eyes, checking her balance, rapping her shin. They spoke in gentle tones, but Sheila barely registered their words. She was exhausted, drained of everything but the thrum of adrenaline that still lingered in her veins. When she was finally released, Ramirez was waiting in the lobby. He wasn't in a rush, wasn't impatient. He simply stood, arms crossed loosely, his expression unreadable but reassuring. "You didn't have to wait," Sheila said quietly. "I did," he replied simply. "You shouldn't go home alone after something like this." Her throat tightened again, gratitude threatening to overwhelm her. She wasn't used to people staying, to someone standing guard after the danger had passed. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the city glistening under streetlights. Ramirez walked her to the curb, where a patrol car waited to give her a ride. Before she climbed in, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Listen," he said. "What happened tonight, it doesn't define you. Don't let it live in your head as fear. Let it live as proof of your strength." Sheila blinked hard, trying to memorize the weight of his words. She nodded, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest. As the car pulled away, she looked back once, watching Ramirez standing under the streetlight. His figure was steady, unshaken, a reminder that calm could be stronger than chaos. When she finally arrived at her dorm, the building was quiet, her roommate asleep inside. Sheila dropped onto her bed, her bag still clutched in her arms. She pressed her face against the damp fabric and let herself sob deep, racking cries that carried both relief and release. But when the tears finally ebbed, she lay back, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached, her palms throbbed, her throat was raw. And yet, a small spark glowed inside her chest. She had fought. She had survived. The next morning, as the sun broke through rain-washed windows, Sheila opened her bag. Her notes were smudged, some pages ruined, but others salvageable. Her laptop was scratched, but working. She laid everything out carefully, like pieces of herself reclaimed. And as she sat there, pen in hand, she realized she wasn't just writing notes for class anymore. She was writing the story she had lived, the night when fear almost swallowed her whole, until a calm voice said stand down and gave her back her future.